Welcome, where business buying banter meets no BS reality. Get ready to dive into the world of buying and selling businesses without the fluff and fancy jargon. Whether you're a seasoned business buying pro or a curious aspiring entrepreneur, this is where the real talk happens. Because in business, there's no room for sugarcoating. Let's get down to the brass tacks.
What's up?
Hey, how are ya?
We're going to talk about stupid stuff today, Richard. It seems to be a trend.
Yeah, is it ever? It's ridiculous. I saw some links and posts and nonsense going back and forth, and it's like it's the the universe of lower market business buying and selling has been invaded by the whack jobs.
Yeah, just when you thought it was invaded years ago, it's getting worse.
Yeah, it's getting worse. And we've talked about it. It's the proliferation of the internet and everybody's you could be anything online. So you could be completely full of crap and get a great website developed and tell a nonsense story with not an ounce of truth, and it just sits out there. And unfortunately, some people buy into it.
And you can look pretty because there's a platform.
Well, I'm not sure I could look pretty, but yes.
You can make yourself look pretty. The marketing in Canva, easy, 1, 2, 3. Now AI, you can create yourself a nice looking community for business buyers, quote unquote, and they pay monthly fees to get all this information, and it looks legit. And whoa. Be
complete
careful.
Garbage. Yeah, complete garbage. And it's unfortunate people are going to get sucked into it. They get sucked into it all the time. And, it's
master classes.
Master classes, boot camp, insider groups, all of these things, it's complete BS.
Yeah.
And again, it's, I've always felt bad because people that are looking to buy a business got hopes and dreams and aspirations to change their life. And then you get on the flip side, these individuals that are selling these BS programs, and they take advantage of these people really at a vulnerable time. Not that they're necessarily emotionally vulnerable, but they're vulnerable from a standpoint that they're looking to change their life. And so they're susceptible to people's promises and delusional and delusions of grandeur of what they can do. And so, I always feel bad from that standpoint, certainly for the individuals who go for that. But on the other side of it is, you have to use your common sense with some of this stuff, and don't be an idiot. One of the guiding principles, and I had that on a post with Mike Finger. We talked about it earlier, and saying, when it comes to information products, and I bought plenty of them over the years, and 20 something years ago when I was looking at investing in some real estate, bought a course, and it was Carlton Sheets. He was the original guy of buying real estate, and it was actually a very effective course. But here's the thing that I look at. If you're going to buy an information product online, if it doesn't come with a bulletproof money back guarantee, don't buy it. Don't walk, run. Because if it really does what people say, they claim that it does, and usually these information products never live up to all the promises made on the website. If it doesn't do what it's promised that it's going to do, you should have your money, be able to get your money back. I mean, I bought a Sonic Care electric toothbrush. It comes with a 90-day warranty. It was $39 or whatever brand I bought. And here people are expecting you to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And if this doesn't work for you for whatever reason in a reasonable period of time, I mean, you can't get your money back. I know in our program, we give people a lifetime guarantee. I don't want anybody's money if it doesn't work for them.
That's the way
I'm going to say it doesn't work for them. It's like, if you're not thrilled with the information, if it's not worth a lot more than the price, we'll give you your money back.
Yeah. And we're going to touch on this toward this latter part of today's show. Let's get into seller transitions, stupid mistakes that buyers make. And might I add, sometimes stupid mistakes even lenders and some attorneys can make. And I'm not an attorney.
Attorneys making mistakes? What, are you kidding me? Do they ever?
Well, if a buyer is going to engage somebody to be an attorney that's not experienced in business acquisitions or SBA, you're going to have issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for longer than me, and you have sold businesses and you help buyers. What is one of the number one mistakes that you see aspiring business buyers do in the beginning stages, talking with a seller what is that transition going to look like? Or is that too early, Richard?
No, it's never too early, because you have to think about what life looks like after the sale. And that's both for both buyers and sellers.
Mm-hmm.
But from a buyer's perspective, one of the biggest mistakes they make is they look at this and say, boy, I'm going to need this seller to stay on board for at least a year to learn this business. Or I'm going to need them for a really extended period of time. And the reality is, if you believe you need the seller for at least a year to really teach you the business, it's probably too complicated a business for you to buy, or it's not the right business for you to buy. And so you want a meaningful transition. And there are some cases where it makes sense to have a seller stay longer. For example, a relationship that they may have with a client or a supplier, or transferring of licenses. But the goal is to have them train you intensely for a short period of time. And then potentially you might even have a consulting agreement for them to stay longer at your discretion. Mm-hmm. But the idea behind buying a business is to be your own boss. So you got to get in there, you got to learn the business effectively and as quickly as possible, and then get them the hell out, because you're the new sheriff in town. So that's it. I mean, the concept of having them stay for a ridiculous amount of time after, to me, it just begs the question, may not be the right business for you.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it confuses the employees as to, in that first 6 months to a year, who should I be reporting to? I mean, the current owner, the founder, or the new owner? So one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen with some buyers is they're looking to acquire businesses, and it states right in the SIM, the confidential memo, right, with all the information, seller transition 2 weeks.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's usually never long enough. I mean, it's 2 weeks is just ridiculous. Like, to me, it's like having a 2-week due diligence period. I mean, it's not, you get into the first day, and I think I've made this a similar comment before. You get in day one, you don't know how to turn on the coffee machine or turn off the alarm. Mm-hmm. You don't know any of the people. You don't know where anything is. I mean, you need longer than that, unless it's a business that you're intimately familiar with and you may have worked in the business.
Right.
And, even in that case, it's probably too short. But I've never seen an effective transition happen in less than 30 to 60 days in the simplest of businesses. And I mean the absolute simplest of businesses, for example, in a franchise resale, where all of the processes, procedures, systems are all well articulated in an operating manual. So when you get outside of those type of businesses, where usually they're all over the place and nothing is written down about how these things work. I mean, to think that you could do that in a couple of weeks is nuts. I mean, it's a couple of months for sure. And if you determine after, 30, 60, 45 days that you don't need them anymore, well, you throw them out. I mean, and I'm sure they'll be as happy to leave as you'll be to get rid of them. You also brought up the point about confusion amongst employees. It's rampant. And no matter how much you go over it with the seller, it's hard for the employees not to. They've been doing it for X number of years. So it's a ground rule. You have to sit down with the seller while you're there. You're there for training, and you make it very clear to the employees, you don't go to them.
Yeah. What I'm seeing more of these days would be a younger first-time business buyer coming to the table, and they're hearing a lot of online influence about boring businesses, and that they can just buy this business, collect an immediate owner salary that's transferred from the original founder to them, and they'll work on it maybe 2 to 3 hours a week because it's just going to run by itself. And I think they're learning the hard way that is not how it works. But that's the way a lot of these proposed business buyers assume it's going to work.
Yes, and you see that in a couple of ways. One, these absentee run businesses. The idea conceptually, they're fantastic, but we've talked about it before. If an absentee run business, if you don't transition properly, it's going to be absentee run profits. The profits are going to run out the door with someone else. And you have to immerse yourself in the business and learn the business for a period of time, at least 6 months, maybe longer, so that you know how the business works. Even if you have a terrific manager in place, well, what if that terrific manager leaves, quits? gets hit by a Pepsi Cola truck, whatever the case may be. You have to know, who do I even hire for that business? And this concept, I love bland, boring, unsexy businesses preferably, but this concept of buying these boring businesses and thinking they're easy to run. No, they're boring businesses because they don't get a lot of attention, but they're not necessarily easy to run. You can learn how to run them in a reasonable period of time, but you have to learn how to run them. And in some cases, where the seller, where there's some good relationships, I'm working with a client right now, there's some important client relationships, really important client relationships. The individual is getting close to retirement age, and he's planning to have an effective retirement. And between the buyer and seller, they worked out that the individual is going to stay for a year for a really effective transition, because there's a handful of really important clients. But to just think that you're, with no experience, no track record, that you're just going to go in, no matter how easy, a lemonade stand has its own difficulties to run. Like, you're not going to run a business with employees and customers and suppliers and inventory and whatever, like the whole buffet of a business, to think you're just going to go in there, forget about absentee. That's you're smoking crack. But
Right.
but easy. Yeah, it becomes easy, becomes easier, but it's not easy from day one.
It's not easy from day one. And if you're going to use the SBA, which most business buyers, if you're looking at larger transactions from 300,000 on up to 5 million plus, there's going to be some SBA SOP eligibility policies that need to be in place for a seller transition. And that is where people can forget to be mentored up front, the business buyer and the business seller, to make sure both of them are accepting of those terms. And I'm afraid that in this industry, not everyone is mentoring out of the gates, the brokers, the buyers, the sellers. What should this look like? Or what are you proposing? And let's get into the weeds of it now, as we're negotiating and talking through what it's going to look like. Because if it doesn't meet SBA SOP standards, we need to just stop the buck right here, right now.
Right.
But because a lot of these transactions are incentive driven by parties that are just trying to push it all the way, and we'll figure out a way when we get to the final hour. That's what's happening out there. They're pushing without educating, without mentoring, without being fully transparent as to what those policies are. And then when push comes to shove, everybody's hitting the fan, and then they shift blame it on the lender, like, what's going on? Wake up, people. We need to talk about seller transitions, especially if the SBA is involved. What can be qualified and what is not?
Yeah, we have too many people in the equation that are just, they're transient, they're passing through the career, right? And they don't want to get into the weeds and the detail. There's too much fear, incorrectly so, of blowing the deal.
Yeah.
For not paying attention to the details. And what they don't realize, if you don't pay attention to the details, the deal's not getting to the finish line.
That's right. I like to share with you a real story, because on this show, we like to share real stories of things that really do happen in the marketplace. And this was a deal where it was explained to the buyer and the seller with SBA financing. The seller can stay on no more than 12 months per the SBA SOP to help transition the new owner. Okay. They agreed to it. It was explained. And somewhere along the line, they agreed upon an annual income for the exiting seller to make during the transition period. Okay. And that annual income was $180,000 for.
This is not going to end well.
Yes. For that year, for that first year. Somehow the SBA lender thought that was acceptable because it did not meet the global debt service coverage, because you got to have enough money to pay the SBA loan payment after that seller's getting paid as well. Can you imagine?
Right.
Well, nobody reviewed the seller transition agreement, which was drafted by the seller's attorney. It was handed in to the lender.
Yep.
And handed into the underwriter. The processor in between the lender and the underwriter she didn't look at it. Now, granted, it's not their responsibility, but for crying out loud, it should be the responsibility of the front end lender just to fine tooth comb seller transition agreements. Number one, are they within 12 months? And number two, the income that the seller is expecting, is it going to work? So the income, first off, Richard, 180 grand wasn't going to work. The deal wasn't going to cash flow, paying him that much money on top of the new buyer having to pay the SBA loan payment.
And take a salary for themselves.
Yes. And the worst part about it, somehow the seller and the seller's attorney put in that seller transition agreement, making it for 5 years.
Whoa.
And it was
Good deal.
missed by all parties, including
only 900 grand,
including the attorney. It was all missed and things went backwards fast. So my message to all of the listeners out there, you better have experience, knowledge on the front end, reviewing those seller transition agreements. I'm not an attorney. I don't practice to be one, but I do know what to look for that might not meet the SBA SOP requirements. So that's just one of my stories.
I mean, it's mind-boggling, but not surprising,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's just, it comes back to being diligent. It's very difficult. Individuals who are looking to acquire business, especially first-timers, it's almost ridiculous to expect them to engage or to be able to, on their own, go through the documentation that's involved with any lender. Mm-hmm. Even a deal without a lender, there's a lot of documentation once the attorneys get involved. But having a proper attorney who's going to go through it, with, as you said, with a fine-tooth comb is critical, because then when you get out of it, the good news is that that deal was with the seller and not an employee or an outside consultant, because there is potentially some maneuverability. But I don't know what the outcome is, but I can't see how that ends well at all.
From what I understand, it didn't end well, and the loan is in default.
Yeah, no shock. By the way, someone asked me this question recently. Do you have any idea what is the default rate on SBA loans, on 7A loans?
Great question. On pure ground startups, I don't have a stat, but I can tell you they're much higher on the startup
on
finance.
The startups than buying an existing business.
Correct. The best, the lowest default average would be business acquisition. Startups are a nightmare.
Or a nightmare. And but they don't provide any
there is
data on just acquisitions.
If we dug in, we probably could find it, but I can't speak to what the exact number is, Richard. But that's something maybe I'll check into and report.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I was asked that this week, and I actually, told them I had no clue, but I know who to ask. Now I know who to ask, and now you'll find it out.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Share with us, if you would, maybe a good story of a transition, because you're coaching buyers yourself how to prepare for this. You do a great job. Give our listeners one good story of in like 30 seconds or less of what
happened to me. A business I sold. Mm-hmm. I was giving the guy wanted me there longer, for 6 months, possibly longer. And I said, no problem. And he pitched it along the lines of, he's a very bright guy and he wanted to learn. And he said he wants to come in and just really absorb, because there's certain parts of the business that he wasn't comfortable with. Not the driver of the business. He was a good buyer for the business, but he really wanted to just observe me operating the business. And I retained a little bit of equity in the company. So, and we did that to diffuse any issues if employees were coming to me or whatever. And he said, and his whole take was, and I really wasn't sure that I wanted to do it, but his whole pitch to me was, and these are in his words, I just want to sit back and observe for as long as possible. So to absorb as much information as possible. And I said, fine. Well, from the day he arrived and put his foot into place, he knew everything. He was the smartest guy in the world. All you have to do is just ask him, right? He knew everything. He made it impossible. After 2 weeks, I told him, look, you got to, I'll retain my equity if you don't want to buy it out. I can't stay here. I can't stay here. This is not the understanding and the agreement. And the employees are pulling their hair out. Okay, because you're asking me, you're all of a sudden trying to implement changes you know nothing about. He was impossible. And they went out of business. He sold off a piece of it later. And this was a very profitable business. Had some complexities, but it was not overwhelming to run. And He ended up selling it to someone else for much less than he paid me for it. And it was just, and when you spoke to employees after, he said, the guy was impossible. Every single employee told me verbatim, the guy is impossible.
Right.
He knew everything.
Yeah. And bank underwriters will interview buyers to see, you know, are they a fit? We talk about that a lot, Richard. Will they be able to fill in what the seller or sellers are doing today? I have a deal I'm looking at right now. There's 3 partners and they're all involved in the business and they're selling to retire. And I have a married couple that wants to buy it. The wife has, you know, office and payroll experience, and that will fit nicely for one of the 3 buyers that takes care of the payroll and the financials and such. But then we have 2 other partners that actually work in the business. And the husband of that's buying the business, how are you going to handle operating what they both do full time?
You won't.
That's just it.
You can't. You got to, you got to account for a replacement salary, and it's always dangerous because you look at it. There's 3 people now. One of them may be more administrative in nature, right, as far as handling the receivables, payables, etc. But anyone who's really dug in and engaged with the operations of the business, it's hard for them to even get a handle on what it is they do every day because they've probably been doing it for years. So one person, you're not going to replace 2 full-time people. Right. And so you have to account for making sure that you can hire for that position. What is that position going to cost? Can you really get the right person? And furthermore, you may be a case of having to say, you know, one of these 3 or 2 of the 3 have to stay post-closing.
Right. There you go. Right. And that's a possibility, especially now with the new SOP structure that, you know, an owner can stay on. Right.
Yeah.
We may need that in that case on this transaction. A lot to be worked out, but this is where today's typical business buyer, they're moving so fast, just thinking this business that was established in 1982 is going to be boring. Well, when there's 3 owners that are retiring and the seasoned employees are near retirement age too, that's a threat.
Oh, absolutely.
Right on.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely.
I'm trying to share that with the buyer to understand, and it's an industry that is struggling. Some lenders won't even take on this particular industry for an acquisition. So just because of the times are changing with digital marketing and such, but there's so much to look at. And I think that leads me into who's the dupa?
Well, one thing before you who the dupa, one thing, and that point could you mention because it's important. That's where buyers go from logic to emotion. You know, when this process starts, the seller is almost always operating from a point of emotion because they look at how many years they've invested in the business, it's blood, sweat, and tears. It's their legacy, etc., and all these things. So they start from a point of emotion and thinking that how much money they need to sell this for or what they think it's worth. It's usually not even close. And the logic is a very small part of their thought process. The buyers go into the opposite. They go into it from a logical perspective. They're looking return on investment. They're looking to make sure that they can structure the deal properly. And the emotion plays a smaller role at the beginning. But as soon as that starts to shift, the buyers get in trouble. In other words, when the buyers start looking at things too emotionally, and then the seller all of a sudden is looking at things logically, the buyer's in big trouble. And the seller, of course, should be looking at things logically. Both parties should. But the point being, when we're talking about transition, when buyers transition and start to fall in love with the business and see themselves operating it, and they're falling asleep at night thinking about all the wonderful things that they're going to do with the business, they've already gone to the far side of wrong in the way they're looking at the business, way too emotional. And the example you cite is exactly that. It's like almost you can't even convince them that they're not even looking at this at the right way. And they get into deep, deep doo-doo.
Right. And a lot of times they're just looking at it cash flows, which is great. That's what we want it to do. But will it cash flow when you step in? And those 3 are gone. And
exactly.
Probably the soon to be retired employers are going to say, I'm not dealing with some new young buyers coming in here
who's telling me what to do.
That's right.
There we go. And I know we got a bunch of great questions, so we'll do do who's the dupa, and then we got a bunch of questions. This is great.
Great. Well, should we do them now?
I always love the fart. Sorry.
That came in off guard on me, and I took it. It's all good. So we love Who's the Dupa, because every week we usually will share a story about what's going on in the industry, real life stories. But Richard and I and others have been seeing a different trend in the buy a business marketplace. And who's the buyer, or who's the dupa? Well, we have to be careful, because business buyers can be the dupa, Richard.
Yep.
And what we want to share with our listeners is the silver tsunami is huge. We've been talking about it. Oh my goodness. I learned about it over 20 years ago from a market president at a community bank that I worked at. He told me, when we used to visit small business owners, before you leave, make sure you understand what is their succession plan, what is their exit plan. And you cannot leave their office unless you have it. We would do joint appointments. He graded me on the fact that, did I remember to have that conversation?
Right.
Because that was so important to him. Well, here we are in that moment. The silver tsunami is here, and it's going to be here for the next 3 to 5 years. Baby boomers retiring, selling their businesses. So therefore, we have today a lot of folks, influential folks online, selling courses, masterminds, communities all over the place. And we're seeing a lot, Richard. And the message I want to stress to everybody, if you're an aspiring business buyer, slow down. Slow down. Don't be the dupa working with folks that might be steering you in a direction that is not in your best interest. So I'll yield the mic and let you take it from here.
Well, there's a number of pieces to it, and we talked about it earlier in the show. The first thing is, as a guiding principle, it's great to have a mentor. I mean, the oldest formula for success in the world, if you want to embark upon a new project in any way, shape, or form, the easiest way to look at that is find someone who's already proven to be successful at doing that and just copy them. And even better, get them to mentor you. But at the very least, the underlying theme to that is, don't start getting sucked in to information, materials, advisors, and consultants for people who have not done exactly what you want to do. Because if you do that, then you're the dupa. I'll go further and say you're an idiot. Okay. It just makes perfect sense. That's number one. Number two is know what you don't know. Okay. People believe that just because you've got some work experience or maybe a great education at a highly pedigreed, terrific university, that there's no connection between education and knowledge in the real world. Mm-hmm. And so make sure that you're aligning yourself with individuals who have done this before. Mm-hmm. That's the key thing. And recognize that you don't know everything. Who's the dupa if you think you're smarter than everybody else? You're the dupa. So take a step back and understand, process the information, because there's tons of it, and there's tons of garbage and rotten information, misinformation. It's horrific. And align yourself with someone who's authentic, who's done this before, whose agenda is to help you. And if there's courses, well, look, my firm sells a course. It's sold more. It has sold more than all these other scam artists combined, all these self-anointed gurus, right? We're very legitimate or authentic. We provide great support to people. Wherever it is, just make sure you're aligning yourself with someone or a group that's agenda is to help you. They want to understand and not just sell you something.
Right.
And then if you buy that, you're a dupa. They're all dupas on the other side, but that's fine. It's their business. I don't judge anybody. They do whatever they want. I don't agree with it. I don't like a lot of their business practices, but you know what? It's incumbent upon the buyer. If there's the ultimate buyer beware, then this is it as well.
That's right. I saw a post yesterday on LinkedIn about coaches, consultants, advisors. There are a lot of courses out there that are being sold online. We all are aware of that. But a lot of rookie folks that want to get into the business buying space are buying perhaps your course, Richard, and spinning off one as their own. This is
Yeah, I've had that. Yeah, I had one recently. So it's like you look at it and I say to myself, do I take it as the ultimate compliment? No. We've been doing this for many years. We've had it a couple of times. And the one thing that I've always let people know on the other side, if these are our words that we spent a lot of time devoting to. I was born in Canada. Canadians were not litigious by nature, but I've let anybody know that who infringes upon the copyright, that I'll spend my entire fortune if I have to bury them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they can't run far and there's no place on this planet far enough that we can't hunt them down. Because you know what, to me, there's nothing more sickening than stealing someone else's work. It's
Mhm.
few and far between, a handful of times over the course of the past number of years. But when it's happened, I like to think I'm a pretty decent guy. I get completely bonkers about it. Don't steal someone else's work, and don't steal, you know what? Like, if you're too stupid to be original, find another business.
Mhm.
We had this recently, the one you and I were talking about. So that individual you talked about the silver tsunami. The Parker tsunami is coming soon for them.
I love that. Yes, and it should. And aspiring business buyers are buying these courses secondhand, made from
Yeah.
fools
Yeah,
that
exactly.
never worked in SBA business acquisition financing. Maybe they sold a business because they got lucky, but that's perhaps it. Maybe one. There's a big difference out there of who you are engaging to guide you.
Yeah, absolutely. I try not to get crazy about it. I know, like, when it comes to the plagiarism issue, I've told you how we go after these people. And similarly, I know how much work that's gone involved in developing these relationships and truly helping people. And most people, these people all flame out. They all burn to the ground. They start spending money on social media. They're blah, blah, blah. You're yelling and screaming from the mountaintops about all this stuff that they do. And in short order, their nonsense it just flames out by and large, and I don't know if people necessarily see through it. They just realize that they're full of crap, and so they just go away at some point. The problem is the internet. You could be anybody that you want to be, and people get fooled and sucked in all the time. And so it's a combination of use your common sense, don't be an idiot,
Mhm.
and align yourself. Make somebody prove to you that they have done this before. Testimonials, we have tons of them. For example, you have tons of them. And with testimonials, ours, of course, are all legit. Yours, of course, are all legit. But the reality with testimonials, people, they don't believe them, but they read all of them. Just, you get it from the horse's mouth. Let someone prove to you what they've done exactly,
That's right.
that mirrors what you want to do. Because if not, forget about them.
That's
Save your
right.
money. Give it to charity.
And we talked about this on a show prior. Google reviews can be purchased, and there are
Absolutely. You can purchase
advisors out
followers
there.
too.
Yep, there are advisors out there and coaches and consultants that you can just see.
Yep.
There's no way you can fund that many acquisition deals in a 60-day window, every couple of hours over 60 days. It's
It's nonsense. It's
ridiculous.
just complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And you know what? It's hard for legitimate people, legitimate business people, whether in our space or in other spaces. It's hard not to get aggravated. It's hard not to have heartburn over it. It's hard not to fall into the trap of listening to all the noise. But the reality is, you got to just put your blinders on. Of course, you want to know who the competition is, but you put your blinders. But they're not competition. Those people are not competitors. You want to put your blinders on, focus on helping people, doing the right thing. And ultimately, they all flame out.
That's right. My heart is on this show for those that are a potential business buyer, is to
Yeah, of
just
course.
pay attention and hear us out and do the work that Richard says, because it's coming in full force.
Yeah. Is it ever?
I always say, where opportunity blooms, the vultures loom, and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
flying
Yeah.
high and they're coming in.
They're coming in, yeah, and then it's okay, but they're at the end of the day, they're eating all the shit on the side of the road. So,
Yes.
so goodbye and good luck to you.
Oh my goodness. Well, should we see if we have any questions that we
We
need
got a
to?
lot of good ones. I saw some ones from
Okay.
Jason and some others. So go ahead. Saw Rocky asked me about, did I say Pepsi Cola truck? Yes, I did say Pepsi Cola truck. So go ahead.
Here we go. Chasen, good to have you on the show. And everyone else has been in the chat. Thank you so much. What about turnkey operations, Richard? Is that a real thing today?
Yeah, marginally. I mean, they do exist more so in franchises, because we talked about earlier, they're closer to to it. But the reality is there are really no turnkey businesses, because just think about it this way. The second the owner leaves who was operational, it's no longer turnkey.
That's right.
Because they were a big part of it. So you potentially are replacing them. But the second that individual leaves, the idea of turnkey is out the window.
Yeah, great answer. It is out the window, especially if that original founder who now sold had the relationships with the clients, and somewhere along the line, the due diligence wasn't strong enough to determine how tied he was to some of those relationships.
Relationships, right. I see Scott asked a great question here. What do you do if a deal checks all the boxes except location, i.e. another, or e.g. another state? Well, assuming it checks all the boxes, that we always talk about, well, you have two choices: either move or don't buy the business.
Right.
You don't want to run it. You're not going to run it from afar.
Yeah.
Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean to be that blunt. It's really from a standpoint of, it's that concept of absentee run businesses, and especially in another state, even if they have everything in place, you're not, if you're, it's different from institutional investors, private equity people. This is the business they're in, but as an individual buying it, operationally, or is it, a big part of your investment, maybe the single biggest investment you make, if you can't be there, and certainly for a long period of time, and it's a business that requires oversight, you move. You either move or you move on.
Yeah, and every bank underwriter will agree with you on that, unless it's an online business of some sort that can be remote. And that does happen, because there are a lot of remote employees for businesses as well. But definitely location-wise, I financed 4 different businesses for a couple, and they were in the Milwaukee and Chicago market, which the 2 metro markets are pretty close to each other. That was acceptable because the underwriters knew all 4 businesses were probably a 2-hour drive to get to all 4 of them.
Yeah, I had one today actually from a client who was talking about it. It was a much further distance than that, and it was there were some other points to it, but to Scott's question, it's problematic.
Yeah.
If you're not, just an institutional investors, PE firms buy them all the time, but this is for the individual. It's just not a good, it's not a good formula.
Yeah, he's got another follow-up. How about a 2-hour drive?
Are we negotiating now, Scott?
That's a good buyer.
I mean, it's a little better. However, I think the bigger question that you have to ask is, what are you going to be doing with the business? If your skills, because you've got to match your greatest skill set with the business to be successful, and if you're going to be involved operationally, I mean, you want to be involved operationally. If you are not going to be involved operationally and you're leaving it to another group to operate the business, you have to understand and that, you're leaving your future in someone else's hands. Personally, I wouldn't do it, but it's I just don't think it makes sense if it's a business that requires oversight and, operational involvement, unless you're planning to make the commute every day. Now, is it possible that you could spend 3 days a week there? Yeah. I mean, certainly, but at the beginning, certainly when you acquire the business, you want to be there every day for many, many months till you really understand that business. So that, that's a big part of the equation that you have to consider as well.
Say that again, please, for all the business buyers who think they can just be absentee the first 6 months they acquire a business, because they want to hang on to their corporate employment.
I get it,
right?
But it doesn't make sense. You've got to learn the business. This most simple business to run, and we've talked about it before. This most simple business to run that has 1 employee or 2 employees. If you don't know that business and that employee leaves or disappears, or for Rocky gets hit with a Pepsi Cola truck, then what are you going to do? Now you're really in deep doo-doo, because not only is the employee gone, you can't even leave your job to work on it. So like that business is it's not going to go away slowly. It's going to evaporate overnight. Like you're going to have the level of heartburn that is unbelievable. Even drinking Canada Dry ginger ale won't help you for that.
I'll add more heartburn. A buyer that funded a loan with me a few years ago. It was an absentee-owned marketed business by the listing broker. He kept his corporate job, and underwriter was okay with it. Everybody assumed the due diligence was fair and done. He got into the business and he called me a month later saying he was lied to.
Yeah, of course.
The listing broker completely lied to him. He said he had to balance his corporate job and somehow figure out how to work the business at night, and it just about killed him.
Yeah, and well, he knew what he wasn't lied to. He just was dumb. Sorry, with all he's the dupa, okay? Because you know what? If you could you listen to everything the other side of the table has to say. You listen to everything, but you believe nothing. You validate it yourself. We have one more question from Rocky, which was, I think, how far in advance should planning for a transition begin? Ballpark, question mark. Yesterday. The second a business is of interest to you, it's one of the ongoing things that you need to be thinking about as far as the transition, and not from a delusional standpoint of thinking about here's all the wonderful things I'm going to do with this business when I take it over, but really in a putting together, having good mental maps of how this is going to work. What is it going to look like after I take over? There's a whole part in our course we talk about post-purchase priorities. It's a 90-day plan that's separate and apart for this, but keeping your eye on the ball as far as what this transition is going to look like. It evolves because you're going through the process of negotiating with sellers, but it's never, ever too early to start thinking about it.
Good answer. I like it.
Do I get a sticker?
You do. Great. And that was a great question. Well, I think we wrapped up all the questions. We wrapped up our Who's the Dupa. Anything else you want for closing comment, Richard?
No, just to tell you, I love doing these shows with you.
I love doing them with you as well, because it's truth. This is truth.
Yeah, and sometimes, we get a little nuts with saying whether, the number of people that show up or whether it translates into some activity or whatever. We don't do it for that. We're doing it from an information standpoint, but it's a great service, and I learn a ton when I talk. When I talk with you, but I learn a ton when I listen to you, and great participants and good questions. And I just want to tell you, I absolutely cherish these the hour we get to spend together every week. It's wonderful, and I hope people really heed your advice as it comes to financing a business purchase, because you're really terrific.
Right back at you. When it comes to supporting business buyers before they even get to the financing avenue, there's a lot that needs to be educated on the front end. And I know you offer webinars. You have
doing one next week.
Tell us about that, would you?
April, and maybe Sia can put up the link or whatever. As a matter of fact, if people go to my website, richardparker.com, they actually put it on as the lead ribbon or banner for the next few days, because we only have a few spots left. Got a crazy reaction, which is great. So it's a 2-hour webinar. Last week we covered, how to select the right business, and also how to increase your deal flow. And this week we're going to be talking about the 10 commandments of buying a business, and also business valuations. Really, really helpful. We got great feedback. It's 2 hours with a lot of Q&A. And so if you go to richardparker.com, you could get it's all by Zoom. So it's it was really popular. I got terrific feedback. So that's always heartwarming. And it's not an infomercial. We're not sitting there for 2 hours selling products. It's not that at all. We just, the agenda is just educate people.
I love it. And I listened to last week's episode, and it's on your YouTube channel, not the Business Buying Banter one.
Yes, correct.
But on your personal one, right?
Yes, yeah.
What's that YouTube channel?
Richard Parker Diomo, right, Sia? Is that the one? Yeah, Richard Parker, YouTube at Richard Parker Diomo.
Yeah. Got it.
And in the invitation, as a matter of fact, when you go to richardparker.com now and register for the webinar, there's a link right in the registration page to access the YouTube video that you're talking about. We got fantastic feedback on it, because it's good stuff. No BS, and just telling people, you got to tell people what they need to hear, not always what they want to hear.
There were first-time business buyers. I think you had maybe at the time, there were 8 that were asking some really good questions, because
we had 28 people on there. It was great. This week we have we're well over 50, so only have a few spots left. So
that's fantastic. Everyone has to start somewhere, and if you're gonna start somewhere, start with credible, long time in the business experts, please. Not influencers, ones from the heart.
Not influencers. Deb, as usual, thank you for having me.
You too, my dear. We'll see you next week. All right.
Ciao for now.
Bye.